Hello, welcome to Cross Currents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator for today's program. Our topic is On-Campus Stadium, Touchdown or Fumble. No topic in recent memory has engendered more discussion in the Fort Collins community than the possibility of abandoning Hughes Stadium and building a new stadium on campus. Those for it stress the enthusiasm, tradition building, outside financial support, and enhanced reputation an on-campus stadium would bring to Colorado State. Those against it cite the adverse impacts in the neighborhoods, the overemphasis on non-academics, the huge cost, and the lack of evidence to support the reasoning for building an on-campus stadium. To discuss these issues surrounding the controversy, we have a larger than usual panel who have various viewpoints. On my right is Jack Graham, Athletic Director at Colorado State. On his right is Eric Wilmson, IT professional, Colorado State University Libraries. On his right is Karen Snyder, a senior soil and crop sciences major at Colorado State. Next to her is Chase Eckert, a senior communications and political science major at Colorado State. Next to him is Carl Wangsvik, a retired teacher from the Poudre School District. And next to him is Lauren Crabtree, Emeritus Distinguished Professor of History and former Chancellor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Welcome to all of you and to our studio and viewing audiences. To begin our discussion, let's find out the primary concerns that each of you have regarding the building of an on-campus stadium. Then we'll talk about these issues in more detail. We'll just go down the line, starting with Jack.
Well, I would say that as the athletic director of Colorado State and someone who's actually proposed the concept of an on-campus stadium, I don't have any specific primary concerns, although I do share everyone's interest in digging down deeply on this question and making certain that we're exploring the topic thoroughly, having a good discourse with one another, so that when we get to the point that we make a decision about whether or not we're going to go forward with the stadium, it's a well-informed decision. So I'm all ears and receptive to hearing as much as I can tonight.
Okay, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I'm in favor of the stadium, and I'm in favor because I think it is good for it's good for the fans, it's good for the athletic program, it's good for CSU as a whole, and I think it's good for the city of Fort Collins. I think that it raises our athletic profile, and in so doing will help to raise the profile of the university, and in so doing that will help us have stronger funding sources, not for athletics so much as for academics.
Okay, let's go on to Karen.
Thank you. While I respect and appreciate the reasoning behind creating an on-campus stadium, I believe that it would have far more unintended and negative consequences than positive. I believe it would take the focus away from us as an academic institution, a research institution, and a service institution primarily, and that it's not that football is a bad thing, but I don't believe our culture should be focused around football. That's not why people come here to study.
Okay, let's go on.
Thank you.
Next one, because I said your primary concern. Chase?
Hi, my name is Chase Eckert. I'm a senior double major in communication and political science at Colorado State University. While I am supportive of the stadium, I do think we need to take into account neighborhood issues, impact on the broader community. Clearly, this is a large-scale project. It is going to have an impact on the surrounding neighborhoods, and I think that's something that we have to address at some point as we move this project forward.
Okay, Carl?
So how about a football analogy? CSU is aiming for a touchdown, but their approach is desperate. If we have only one more play in the game and only the Hail Mary pass will do, what's the rush? Let's take a timeout and do some planning here before we do this all or nothing play. I believe that Hughes is an established locale. that the positives are wishful thinking and the multiple negatives are substantial.
Okay, Lauren?
I really haven't made up my mind yet on the stadium. I think the stadium is not really the issue, as a matter of fact. I think the real issue is the nature of intercollegiate athletics and CSU's desire to be competitive in intercollegiate athletics. So big-time athletics can get in the way of academics. It can also be a support for academics. I'm waiting to see what the committee will report to Tony Frank.
Let's start then with the community aspects. Carl, how do you see the traffic being impacted?
The traffic's going to be worse than Hughes, obviously. I think we're looking at a traffic situation in Midtown that would probably lock up traffic north, south, east, and west. Now we have an east-west problem with traffic on game days. And as one of the staff members noted on the website, it took us about 20 years to get that figured out for Hughes. So it's good now, we should leave it that way.
Okay, anybody else want to comment on traffic?
Well, I think that there are some legitimate concerns, and I think anytime you bring 35, 40, 45,000 people to a venue, you're going to get traffic. That's the very nature of the beast. At the same time, CSU brings about 35,000 people onto campus every single day as part of the business of the university. And so we do have capabilities with regard to traffic management and parking, et cetera. But I don't think this is something that can be overlooked. And through the process, we're investigating how traffic engineers and parking engineers can look at these challenges to make certain that we are addressing concerns and figuring out whether or not we can propose solutions. And I do think that there is another side to this, which is that through the investigation process, it's even possible that to enable us to accommodate 40 or 50,000 people on a single day, we actually improve the overall traffic flow in the city of Fort Collins. There could be a bit of a silver lining in this process.
Yeah, I'd like to add that while I do agree that there's going to be traffic and parking issues associated if this happens, I think that creative people can come together to come up with solutions to those. There are a lot of options that we can look at working with the city to try to work those out in terms of busing, the Mason Street corridor. Currently, my wife and I live less than a mile from Hughes Stadium. We drive to every home game because we tailgate, and we have to bring our tailgating equipment with us. There are ways to work around that if at the new stadium, if we have some tailgating lockers, so I don't have to take tailgating equipment with me, then even though I'll be further away from the stadium, I'll happily take the bus. So.
Okay, anyone else? Chase?
Yeah, I'd just like to throw in there is a primary difference between Hughes and an on-campus stadium, and that is that we can outlet traffic from Laurel, Shields, Prospect, and College, as opposed to one street where you're dumping all 35,000 people out onto. So you can disperse traffic a little better at an on-campus location. I think that's an important point in all of this.
Oh, just regarding the tailgating, I don't believe there'll be enough space on campus for people to enjoy that activity, and that I don't see why we can't have lockers on at Hughes Stadium for that same purpose. Regarding the bus issue, there's already buses that run 2 hours before every game and 1 hour after every game that go from Hughes to campus and other areas around Fort Collins, so I don't see how that's any different than a Hughes versus an on-campus stadium with either of those issues.
Okay, and I have another question now, and I don't know who knows the answer. How many students actually live on campus now?
I
Do we
believe
know?
the figure's around 5,000.
It is
Okay,
5,000
so
to
we don't
6,000.
know that, there isn't necessarily more or less driving. There might be just as much driving because so many students live off campus.
Yes.
As far as that's concerned, it's pretty much the same.
A lot of kids drive because it's their access to tailgating. In Minnesota, they drive from the campus over to the tailgating area in St. Paul, then they take the bus back to the campus.
Oh, okay.
That's
Lauren,
what
you
we
had a comment?
Yes, I was at the University of Tennessee, and we had a 108,000-seat stadium right on the middle of the campus. We had limited access, although interstates 40 and 75 come together right there. But I was always the first one there and probably the last one to leave. It's because I was chancellor. It took me less time to get off that campus than it takes me to get out of Hughes parking lot right now. I do think that we can handle the question of traffic I think we have to be concerned about the impact on the surrounding neighborhoods, however.
Okay,
And I think traffic's the least of our problems.
okay, what about parking?
Parking is a problem.
Okay, can you
If there's
detail
not
that
enough
some
parking
more?
on campus, the parking, it will be in the neighborhoods. And in some places, that's okay. In Lincoln, they seem to love it. Park in the neighborhoods all around the campus because there's not much parking there. But here, I don't think I would. I do believe they're going to build some parking garages, but as I understand it, they're only going to handle about 14,000 cars. So
Okay.
that's a bit of a problem.
Can you address that at all, Jack?
You know, I don't know that I can be very specific about it, Barbara, because I don't have the statistical details about our parking capacity on campus. I've only been around for about 3.5 months, so I'm still on a learning curve, frankly. But I do know that we're able to accommodate about 35,000 people today coming onto campus to go to work, to teach, and to attend classes. And the master plan for the university does call for additional parking capacity because there is an expectation that we're going to be growing in headcount over the coming decade or so. And I would also say from a personal perspective, I've done lots and lots of travel throughout my life to college venues to watch college football games. I've been to Knoxville, for example. It's a fantastic experience. I've been to Baton Rouge to watch LSU play and been to Tuscaloosa. And as a fan, not being a local person, I've always found myself in a position where I never got a prime parking space. I found myself parking a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, even a mile away from the stadium venue. And frankly, walking the mile or the half mile to the stadium was a huge part of the fun. It was a lot of fun to see the people, to see the tailgating parties and the celebrations and the traditions that existed on the campus and the way people celebrated their university. And so I don't think there's any way we're going to avoid and solve entirely parking. Parking at a football venue is part of the challenge, but I also think it can be transformed into something that's actually pleasant and part of the experiences as opposed to a huge negative. But I think it's very important that we pay attention to it.
Want to talk
I
about
think
parking?
I think these things can be solved. The best way to solve them is with an environmental impact study. That's what they've done elsewhere. And in Minnesota, for instance, they solved 500 neighborhood problems before they even broke ground on the stadium. And that's really the way to go.
Okay. What about the noise? That's a neighborhood issue too. Does anyone have any comments? It's not going to be covered, is it?
I hope there's a lot of noise. I mean, I am really looking forward to hearing a lot of cheering and a lot of bands. I don't think we're talking about noise that's going to go much beyond, if we have a night game and we kick off at 7 o'clock, the football game's going to be done by 10 or 10:30. And so extending into midnight hours, this is not going to be a concert venue. That's not my expectation anyway. But again, I think we have to be respectful and mindful of the fact that not everybody appreciates that kind of noise and take it into consideration. There's a process to enable us to look at that. But at the same time, I think it's part of the tradition of good quality game day experiences.
Okay, what about the audience? Do you have any questions on neighborhood impact, traffic, parking, noise?
Before I returned home to become a second-generation CSU graduate, have my diploma signed by Dr. Crabtree, I attended the University of Southern California, where in South Central Los Angeles, I was quite surprised to find that the only time they put security at the dorm doors was during football games. And after reading the 2009 study, Crime in College Football Games, I'm not as surprised as I was. But I do want to know something. I have a question for you, and that is, have you thought about security on campus and in the community during games and other events?
Yes, is the simple answer to that question. Security around any athletic event at Colorado State University is of the highest priority, whether it's a basketball game, a volleyball game, or a football game. We have lots of people called Yellow Jackets. Landmark Security is who we hire specifically to ensure fan security, fan safety, as well as service. I mean, they're there to help people as well. I'm fairly familiar with USC. I lived in California, was raised in California. It's a tough neighborhood. It's a very, very tough neighborhood. And so I can appreciate that dynamic may be a bit different than the dynamic that we'll experience here in Fort Collins, but I don't think you can ever take anything for granted, and the safety of our fans, players, faculty, staff is of paramount importance.
I just wanted to piggyback really quick. So I'm not here tonight in my role as the Governmental Affairs Director for ASCSU, but I know I've worked with a number of you in that capacity over the last couple years. But one of the things that we've looked at as an organization is that on-campus safety issue. How do we keep students who are at games and possibly drinking, things like that? So we have a couple of programs that deal with that. Obviously, we have our Ram Ride program to take people home at night, but we also have our Positive Impact program, which sort of serves as an intermediary between students who may be tailgating and the police. So instead of having the first contact for a student who's been drinking or whatever, the first contact for them is another student. And they work with them to make sure they're okay, that they're safe, that they're not going to be in an ambulance within a couple hours, to provide them with plastic cups instead of glass beer bottles, things like that. But safety is key because one of the challenges we see is people who are passing through the dorms. Right now we have key cards, scanners that let people in, but we have the tailgating problem where somebody kind of follows you into the dorm. So that's a broader issue I think you're bringing up on campus, that we have people in and out of the dorms. It's something that we have to address regardless of whether or not we build the stadium.
Okay, Lauren, how did it work at Tennessee?
We had problems, we had issues. Not so much parking issues because we just made all the parking ramps available to the fans. But we had a huge amount of tailgating at the university. There are two aspects to this. One, we had to lock up all our buildings for security's sake, but keep in mind the University of Tennessee is right in the middle of Knoxville and adjacent to some not so healthy neighborhoods. The second issue, and we tried to have security that way. Now, some faculty would go into their offices, open the doors, and forget to lock them, and so we'd have people in and out of academic buildings. We didn't have much in the way of thievery or certainly no assaults, nothing of that sort. The second issue, however, is faculty access to labs, to the library, to their offices on game day. And we had some problems with that because not all faculty are great fans. Even for a 108,000 seat stadium, they want to be able to work in their offices and labs on weekends. And so at least 7 times a year we had that kind of a problem. But I think all these are manageable, but we should go into it with our eyes wide open, recognizing that the students are not the problem. It's the fans that are the problem. The excessive drinking, sure, sometimes students do that, but at Tennessee, out of 108,000 seats, 15,000 are occupied by students. And it will be a similar percentage here. So it's not the issue of students for me, it's the issue of fans and how you control their behavior, not only at the stadium, but also in the neighborhoods. It can be done. It requires enormous cooperation between the police, the city, and the university, and all of us who are concerned about it.
And who pays for that? Is it a university responsibility or a city responsibility?
It's both. The traffic at Tennessee was governed by our own police, the university police, by the city police, and by the sheriff's office. So we had everybody there. And they needed to be there to control the flow of traffic and to monitor behavior. In general, now I'm biased here, but Tennessee had far fewer problems than, now here I'm really going to be biased, than LSU or Florida had.
I agree on the issue of adults. I've never had problems with students at Hughes, but occasionally there are adults who get out of hand. I just wanted to quote a statement from the CPD website, some information that was put on there by one of the CSU staffers.
What's CPD?
Center for Public Deliberation. They ran the forums.
Okay.
Yeah, he says, I worked at the University of Florida, stadium on campus, South Florida, stadium off campus, and the University of Central Florida was off, then built on. There are a host of issues, specifically the alumni alcohol culture that invades the campus. Be prepared for more conflict.
Jeannie Patton, I'm a resident not living near CSU. I have worked on campus 12 years previously. Jack Graham was talking about the 35,000 students coming to campus, on campus stadium, probably 1 to 3 hours before the game begins. And yes, there are probably 35,000 people working on campus daily. However, they're coming in at 6 a.m. to get a jump start. They're coming in at 8 o'clock for that first class. They're coming in at 12 noon for a noon program. They're coming in at 5 o'clock because they're a nighttime student, or there's that graduate student that comes in at 10 o'clock at night to work in the lab. So these 35 students daily on campus are coming in staggered, so I'm still concerned about the 35,000 plus people who will be coming in all within the same range of time to get to that stadium. And also, Jack didn't mention if he knows if we're going to have a roof on that stadium as far as noise is concerned.
Well, we're in process right now with regard to the design of the stadium, consideration of what the stadium building may or may not include, if in fact we proceed with this project. I've not heard anyone express an opinion that they'd like to see a roof on the stadium. So I would say that it's unlikely that there's a vision through the design process that there would be a roof on the stadium. Personally, from my perspective, we live in a wonderful place with a wonderful climate. I would hate to close out the world. And I would say, too, that I appreciate the concern about the traffic, coming on and off campus. And I do think it's a challenge that we're going to have to address. And through the engineers that we're retaining to consider this, to study this, we'll have to figure out how it is that we can deal with the fact that there will be a concentrated number of people showing up at one time in a short period of time and leaving at the same time. It happens probably 250 or 300 times a week, all across the country at other stadium venues. And so there are lots of models out there that we can consider and study, and lots of resources that can be considered to be deployed to meet the challenges. But I don't think we're going to come up with a perfect answer, because that's the nature of 50,000 people or 40,000 people showing up at one time at any venue. There, in my opinion, is no perfect answer. And so hopefully we all go there because we want to be there, and we all take a patience pill about getting in and out.
I'm Jody Johnson, and I am a neighbor of CSU's, and this question is for Mr. Graham. I understand the University of Minnesota, upon building their new stadium, provided a good neighborhood program to neighborhoods of $1 million per year to go on indefinitely. Does CSU plan on compensating their neighborhoods with a good neighborhood program?
There is a process underway right now, what's called the Phase 1 process, to investigate whether or not we should go forward with an on-campus stadium. Just today we announced that a project manager has been retained to help us to facilitate discussions and dialogue with neighborhoods that are proximate to the university. And that specific question, I think, is one that can be raised during that process.
And my questions are directed to Mr. Graham. Will CSU proceed with this project if a majority of students are opposed to it?
It's not my decision, Mr. Johnson. Dr. Frank is responsible for making this decision. He's put a process in place to give consideration to whether or not the on-campus stadium should be moved forward and constructed. And I work for Dr. Frank, and I think he's a very disciplined leader and executive, and I think he's put a good process in place. And at the end of the day, he'll make a decision that he thinks is in the best interest of the university.
Do you have an opinion on that question yourself?
Whether or not this should be put to a vote?
No. Well, if it turns out, however it's done, that a majority of students oppose the stadium, the new stadium, do you think CSU should go ahead with it?
I haven't thought about that, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that from my own perspective, that as leaders of the university, we're accountable for making good choices and decisions for taking this university forward. There's some very significant issues that we're facing as a university. We're in a crisis mode right now with regard to funding. Our university is being defunded as we speak to one another right now. The financial well-being of our university is at risk, and I think the leadership of this university is accountable and responsible for seeing to it that we preserve this institution. We've been around now for well over 100 years, and it's our job to make certain that we keep going forward.
I was just going to say on the student opinion piece, so I've had the privilege of probably conducting half a dozen to a dozen different student voice surveys and tons of outreach events on the plaza and with student orgs, things like that. So it's a tricky process gauging student opinion because, one, it's a very diverse group. When we have grad students that are at the Foothills campus, we have students who live on campus who are freshmen, we have other students who don't check their email. So it's sort of a broad, it's hard to get a good cross section. But that being said, there are mechanisms in place right now which are addressing that opinion, and I think the best approach to dealing with it is not one particular survey or one particular question, yes, no, on a ballot. I think you have to look at the forums that the CPD is conducting, you have to look at student voice surveys that go out, you have to look at in-person outreach events. It's a broad spectrum of data that you have to collect in order to actually gauge student opinion.
Yeah, and I wasn't addressing the methodology. I was just asking if that's what the methodology comes up with.
And this is,
I do think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
this is doable, for sure. You can find out what the students think.
And I think we absolutely are committed to
ASCSU
that.
did a survey of students on the issues important to them. And unfortunately for the athletic department, only 12% listed them as a high priority. The others were consistently higher than that by a fairly large number of students.
I want to jump in on that really quick because the survey was not actually targeted at athletics. It was a tuition survey.
Right.
There was 2 questions on the survey that dealt with athletics, which is sort of unfair because if you send a survey out that says tuition survey, you're not getting a group of people who's probably concerned, where athletics is going to be their primary concern. So that's
Right.
important
Well,
to know.
yeah, I disagree on how many of them dealt with athletics. I mean, I have a copy of the survey. We'll talk about it later. I'd be glad to.
Well, I would just like to say, Mr. Johnson, that I know that Dr. Frank is committed, and I am equally committed to knowing what our student body's views on the construction of an on-campus stadium are. Equally, we're interested in knowing what our faculty thinks, what our staff thinks, what our neighborhood community thinks, what the broader Northern Colorado community thinks. So I think that this decision is not going to be made in a vacuum.
I didn't ask about faculty and staff because I think a lot of us know the answer to that one already.
Okay, I'll follow up his question. If the citizens of the city of Fort Collins, if we come to the conclusion that the citizens of the city are not for the stadium on campus, will that information be considered in the decision? I think there's an impact, community impact that hasn't been mentioned that is something that is very important to the citizens of Fort Collins, and that is the visual impact of a huge stadium right in the center of our city. The aesthetic and visual impact of a stadium is something that is very meaningful to me as a citizen of the city, and I'm wondering if any of you have any response to that.
Is that directed to me?
I think so.
I'd say 2 things in response to your question and statement. One is absolutely the opinions of the Fort Collins community will be taken into consideration by Dr. Frank and the Stadium Advisory Committee in making recommendations to him. So the answer is yes. With regard to the architectural design of the building, if we build a sore thumb, I will be incredibly disappointed. You can walk onto the campus at the University of Colorado in Boulder and frankly walk right past Folsom Field and not even know it's there in places. You can go to Stanford University and walk past their stadium and not even see it. So it is very possible to come up with a design and landscaping features that enable the building itself to be fully integrated into the university and into the community. And I absolutely think that should be a primary objective.
I'd just like to support everybody on this one. We have an obligation to make sure this is a delightful stadium, that it's not a blight on the city of Fort Collins. Now, if you've ever been to South Bend and been to Notre Dame's campus and seen their stadium, it blends in nicely to South Bend and also to the University of Notre Dame. If you've been to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, a far smaller place than here, you'll see their stadium blends in nicely. I just had dinner before coming at McAllister's across from from CSU. That's where the old stadium was, right across the street on College Avenue before it was torn down in favor of Hughes. That worked. Of course, Fort Collins about 30,000 then, and the university about 13,000, but proportionately it still worked. The question is, how is it going to be designed? Will we take into account everybody's opinion? And knowing Tony Frank, I have no doubt but what that will occur. But that's part of the process. And I think we ought not to make decisions without the process running its course.
Okay, let's move on now to whether there is evidence that an on-campus stadium will improve student and alumni engagement. That's one of the reasons for building this, and I'm wondering if we have any evidence that it matters where football is played. Karen, you look like you're interested in answering that.
I had a comment on the previous thing, but maybe sort of
okay.
a segue. It could work. I was wondering if in this debate about beauty and aesthetics, we're not really talking about the facility that exists currently right up against the foothills in a beautiful open area with access to trails and other amenities. And when we talk about beauty and about the state of our city, I think that that's a huge asset. Just the location, the geographical location of Hughes, and that we don't, in this debate of aesthetics, we are kind of sidelining that, and that can be an amazing way to engage people, both students and alumni and faculty and community members, as a way to get them there and enjoy the outdoors and the foothills that are pretty remarkable and an amazing part of our community here.
Okay. Is there any evidence? Carl, you have a lot of papers. Is there anything that shows that?
I have done a lot of reading about alumni engagement, actually.
Okay, good.
And I learned a whole lot of things that I never knew before. The most important thing I learned is this, that students who are engaged on their campus become alumni who are engaged. That appears over and over again. And it doesn't matter what they're engaged in, whether it's the debate club or on the football team, but it's engaged as participants, not as observers and not as fans. And that makes the difference. The best study on that is done by a group, I can't remember the two authorities' name, but they did it on a university they called Anonymous U, because they didn't want to say who it was. And what that showed was, it was microdata. They looked at every donor and they looked at what those donors had actually done in college. And that's the conclusion they came to. If you get students involved in clubs, in all kinds of organizations on campus, they'll be engaged alumni. And the other evidence shows it doesn't much matter, in the future for alums, exactly how the athletic department's doing. But for me, it matters how the debate team's doing at Nebraska, and they just won the Big Ten, and I'm sending them a check.
I will tell you that one of the primary objectives of building an on-campus stadium is alumni and student engagement. And today, Hughes is a fine facility. I played football in Hughes in 1973 and 1974. It's a fine facility. The problem is that Hughes is not on the campus. That is the problem. And when you go to a football game at Hughes today, you're going to a football game. You're not having a college game day experience. You're not on campus. And I can speak from personal testimony as an alumni that when I go to a football game at Hughes, until this year, there wasn't a single time since 1975 I actually came back on campus. People don't go on campus. They go, I'm speaking in way too broad terms. Many, many people go to the football game. They don't come to town. They don't go to the campus. When the game's done, they go home. And they're not engaged in the campus life of Colorado State University. They're going to a football game and they're having a football experience. And I can tell you that from my personal perspective, an objective of an on-campus stadium is to get our fans, our alumni, and our students, mostly our alumni and our fans, because our students, I'll talk about them separately later, but I would like to see our alumni and our fans to have a campus experience, for them to come back and be on campus and not have just a football experience, but to have a CSU experience. Know what's going on in CSU's life today and what its future is as well, and be given an opportunity to actually participate in that future. We have one of the lowest alumni engagement rates in the country. We have 180,000 alumni across the United States. We have 7,000 people who are members of our alumni association. It's a 3.9% participation rate. You can go to other universities that have successful, reasonably successful athletic programs, and it's not uncommon for their penetration rate amongst the alumni to be in excess of 20% and even approaching 30%. And it is my personal experience and my personal opinion that a lot of that has to do with the fact that football brings people back to campus. People don't come back to the university to go to a physics lecture or go to a history lecture. People, when they're 35, 40 years old, come back to the university to go to homecoming, to go to a football game. It gives them an opportunity to be with their former friends, etc., and to be a part of the university. If you didn't have that experience, it's very, very difficult. Without that experience, it's difficult to get people to come back. And when we get people to come back for homecoming, unfortunately, they're 2.5 miles off campus and they're not having a campus experience. So I think that's a primary objective.
Aren't there events on campus during homecoming and ag days and vet days and all those kinds of things? Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right, there are, but they don't draw the sorts of numbers that we're talking about in terms of a football stadium. And I think I want to piggyback a little bit on what Jack said, because I think he hit it right on the head here. So
Okay.
a couple things. getting people on campus is significant if for no other reason than the fact that they're exposed to what we're doing on campus at this particular moment. So we have a lot to show off right now. We've got new buildings, gorgeous facilities, a wonderful environment on our campus. It'd be nice to let some alumni see that, because when you see that, I think it opens up the opportunity to go, that is a cool building, I'm willing to donate to something like that. It provides a model for what the future might be. And that's, to me, is incredibly important, not just because I want to see CSU generate more revenue in the face of state budget cuts, but actually I think this impacts the value of my degree. When you have 4% alumni participation, it shows in some ways a lack of interest in the university. And the problem with that is alumni participation is one of the metrics that is used across the country to gauge where a university falls in comparison with its peers. So in a very direct way, alumni participation impacts the value of my degree. And I think athletics offers an opportunity to get people on campus and to expose them to our brand, which in turn, if they participate, when I graduate, I'm going to donate $5 the day I graduate, only because it impacts that statistic. Doesn't matter if it's $5 or $100, but I'm going to donate $5 because it improves that participation rate. And when you do that, you positively impact the value of our degrees. So there's a very vested interest in this for me.
Chase, you can do better than that.
I got to get hired first to do better than that.
Just a couple of comments. I think everybody's right here. I want to derail this a little bit if I could. It's not so much whether or not we have an athletic department and whether or not we play games on campus or off campus. I'll tell you what makes a difference is winning and losing. Winning and losing. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I was a dean here, and I was in San Francisco at an alumni meeting. It was at that very moment that one of Sonny Lubbock's early teams was rising to the top. I think they were ranked number 4 in the country for a moment. We were overwhelmed by alumni who were wearing their green and gold and were really positive about the place. That's one point. Winning makes a difference. Losing also makes a difference, and it's the other way. I think also the student recruitment can get a real boost from a winning team, whether or not you're playing at Hughes or on the campus. We need to be competitive in athletics if we're serious about it at CSU. I just finished a new book on intercollegiate athletics called Big Time Athletics by a Duke University professor. And he characterized CSU as a lesser also-ran among the top institutions playing Division I, what used to be Division I football. That means we're in the Mountain West, and we're sort of in the bottom of the Mountain West. It's hard to have pride in that.
But that has nothing to do with academics. He's talking about football, is that right?
He's talking about the way football impacts on alumni. It's difficult to have pride in an institution that continues to founder athletically. Now, I'm not arguing that that's good or bad, it's a fact. Now, with respect to alumni engagement, we flubbed this a long time ago at CSU. When I was an assistant dean at CSU, we knew what we were doing wrong, and that was we were not treating the students the way they should be treated. It is now vastly different under Tony Frank's leadership. It's been different for a long time. But for those early years in the 60s and 70s, we didn't do ourselves any good because we mistreated students at CSU.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. I feel that the athletic department is an extreme minority at CSU, and when we talk about alumni engagement, I support the bringing them to campus and having a good experience and having football be a way to interface with them. But when it comes to the students who are currently enrolled, there's 20,000 people there, and 391 of them are varsity athletes. And as we mentioned earlier, only 15,000 students would come to a 40,000 seat stadium. I don't really see how football is serving the needs of the students at Colorado State University when a practice field is built over the tennis courts, for example, or when our academic programs constantly receive less attention than athletic ones. I think that we need to focus more on what the students need and whether we're engaging them, because if we engage the students, then as we can see, that's a long-term investment, which they later become engaged alumni.
You know, I'd like to just talk to that for a second, if I could, Karen, because I think it's important to understand that athletics is a vehicle towards an end, to serve the academics and the student body at Colorado State University. The primary objective actually supersedes the concept of alumni engagement, is that through successful athletics, we are able to create a brand and national prominence and national recognition that can serve this university extremely well, serve the student body extremely well also. The amount of attention that we got during the NCAA tournament last week when our basketball team was in Louisville under Tim Miles' leadership was incredible. I mean, we got about, I don't know, I can't put a specific dollar amount on the number of minutes and the advertising time that produced for us. But, I made reference earlier to the fact that we have a funding crisis taking place in our university. We are seeing the state of Colorado, through a number of constitutional issues, continue to reduce our budget. And we're getting to the point that we have to make a decision about what we're going to do to replace all of that support that we're getting from the state of Colorado. And in the center of that is the concept that we can do a number of things. We can decide to become Arizona State University. We can have 65,000 students here and have that kind of a business model. I don't think that any of us are the least bit interested in that. We could choose to almost do nothing and let tuition continue to rise and pass on the increased cost of tuition to our student body. There's a number of choices. The choice that our president has made is that we will see a moderate amount of growth at CSU, but we want to see as much of that growth as is reasonably possible come from out-of-state tuition, out-of-state students, because the tuition that out-of-state students pay to us has a significant profit margin in it. And it, in effect, is a vehicle that will enable us to replace the budget supplements, the money that we get from the state of Colorado, so that in effect we can sustain the quality of academics and we can sustain the quality of life in Fort Collins through that business model. In order to attract out-of-state students to our campus, we have to do something to get their attention. Today, across the country, people don't know who Colorado State University is. If you compare the University of Oregon to Colorado State University from an academic perspective, from a research perspective, I would stand us up against them any day of the week, any time of the week. Who knows about the University of Oregon versus the Colorado State University? That's an obvious answer because of their athletic prowess and the amount of national attention that they have received. We have to achieve that through athletics if we're going to accomplish this business model. And if we are consistently ranked in the top 25, consistently going to bowl games, consistently playing in NCAA tournaments, the amount of advertising time, brand recognition that we will receive as a result of that, and the probability that we're going to increase out-of-state enrollment is enhanced significantly.
Jack's just dropped us about 5 examples of the wishful thinking that's simply not supported by any of the evidence anywhere. It just doesn't work.
Well, that's absolutely not true.
And I agree with Jack.
Wait,
That is absolutely not true.
I agree with Jack
time.
and I agree with
Wait.
Lauren.
Let him finish.
Having winning teams affects the alumni. But whether those teams win at Hughes or on campus doesn't affect the alumni.
Okay, Eric.
Okay, so wanted to address a couple of things here. One, there was the concept that that all of the attention of the university goes to athletics versus to the things that the university is actually here for. To a certain extent, that's true, but it's not the intent of the university. The university puts a great deal of effort into talking about the great things that we're doing. But what the mass public is interested in more so than what award we won for physics is how good's your football team. Then a couple of other things I'd like to address. So there actually have been some numbers put to the publicity that you can get out of having successful athletic programs, and you can quibble with the numbers. I don't know how these numbers were come up with, but I know that the University of Butler, which has been in the last 2 finals games for the NCAA tournament, commissioned a study that is saying that the advertising, the publicity that they got out of those runs through the tournament equals roughly $1.2 billion.
In what way? They got
that's-
$1.2 billion in contributions?
No, in publicity, not
Oh, okay.
contributions.
Okay.
And like I said, I don't know how they came up with those numbers, but
They made them
that's what was reported. Some more substantial numbers are that following that, Butler had a 45% increase in applications. When George Mason went to the Final Four, they received the following year they received 54% increase in out-of-state applications.
Okay.
And just one other thing, when recently when the Rams beat UNLV at Moby Gym, that became a worldwide trend on Twitter. Compare that to when we recently announced that CSU had successfully completed a $500 million fundraising campaign, which is much more important than beating UNLV, but there certainly was not a worldwide trend on Twitter from that. So,
Okay. Jack, you had a comment.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, addressing sort of a follow-on to what you're saying, Eric, Baylor University has reinvented its athletic program over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. And they had a great year in 2011, their basketball team and their football team both. And in 2011, they have 3,000 freshman openings to fill each year. And in 2011, they had 15,000 applicants to fill those 3,000 positions. And this year, as a result of their football run and as a result of their basketball run, they have over 45,000. So there's a measurable increase as a result of the public attention and prominence that they received. I also want to address what you were sort of alluding to, Carl, about whether or not a football stadium is going to produce a winning football team or a winning basketball team or winning athletics. And I think it's a very, very good question. And there's no guarantee, absolutely no guarantee, that a football stadium or a stadium on campus is by definition going to produce better results. I certainly hope that's the case, and I have a lot of faith that it will in fact produce a different outcome. I did play football at CSU. I was a high school athlete at one point in time, and I was recruited, and I can tell you that as a recruit, when you come and you get to stand next to a football stadium that's got a lot of tradition and some great architectural feel to it, and a place that you take great pride in, you say to yourself and you say to your friends, that's a place I want to play football. So it does attract talent. It attracts coaches. It attracts quality coaches who know that they've now got a vehicle that they can use to attract quality athletes. When they attract quality athletes, the probability of success goes through the roof with regard to the results of the football teams, the basketball teams, et cetera. And so it is my view that there is a correlation between quality facilities. I absolutely know that there is a correlation between quality facilities, including stadium, and attracting quality athletes. And I also know that there's a correlation between quality athletes and winning.
My name is Louis Scharf. I'm a retired professor of electrical and computer engineering and research professor of mathematics. I spent 15 years at CU Boulder. I've spent 22 years at Colorado State University. I just want to make sure that I didn't hear the following from Jack Graham. I didn't hear you say that in the absence of an on-campus stadium, Colorado State University is destined for a bleak economic future. Did I hear you say that?
No, you didn't.
It sounded like it.
No, that's not what I said.
All right. Now, at CU Boulder, students flood across campus to go to Folsom Stadium. I was on the faculty there, and many times I was at games or sitting in my office. Alumni don't flood across campus to go to a game at CU Boulder. At the University of Washington, one of the greatest stadiums in the country, on Lake Union, fans do not flood across the University of Washington campus. Students flood across the University of Washington campus to get to the stadium. Alumni don't flood across campus, duck into physics labs. They don't duck into dorm rooms. That's not the dynamic. They drive to a parking lot and they go to the game. So I'm a little concerned about this idea that an on-campus stadium is that important to the production of this esprit de corps among alumni.
Yeah, I think I will respond to that, because I do think that there I don't have an expectation that on football games that alumni are going to show up and go into physics labs and to history lectures. But I do have an expectation that people will show up and they will be with and celebrate game day with the people that they went to school with, and they'll celebrate the passions that they have about their university. I studied history at Colorado State University, and so I may be inclined to go and be with the people that I actually went to class with and saw professors and have similar interests around history. And be with them and be interested in knowing what's going on in the School of Liberal Arts and what's its future. And so I do have a view that people do give to their passions. People are with other people who have similar interests. And so the opportunity for our development officers and for our university to engage our alumni when they're on campus and they have an opportunity to talk to them about those specific topics in which they have passion enhances the possibility that we can actually get them to invest back into our university.
Okay.
It compromises that significantly simply because they're not on campus. There's not an opportunity to get people on campus coalescing around the things about which they're passionate. They don't actually get to see the things that Chafe was talking about, the progress that's taking place here, the buildings that are going up, and the vision that we actually have for the university. From my perspective, my experience, the conversation is about the football game. It may not be nearly as much about the university and the university's future.
Okay, next question.
I agree with the doctor.
What was
I
that?
looked at a lot of on-campus stadiums. They're on the edge of the campus. The parking is next to them. On virtually none of them do you have alumni crossing the campus to go to the football game. As a matter of fact, universities don't want that because it creates the security problems that we talked about earlier. And so it's not a significant aspect at all. It's wishful thinking.
That's not true.
Okay.
Baton Rouge, Tuscaloosa, Gainesville, Tallahassee. I could go through an incredibly long list of universities. Knoxville, Tennessee, where the stadium is right in the heart of the campus. It is a primary objective of many universities to put it.
Sure, there's some
Okay.
place it can't be
Let
avoided.
me give you one data point. Boy, I find myself talking out of both sides of my mouth in this conversation. You can see that. You can hear it. But at Knoxville, we had, at every football game, what was called the Arts and Sciences Faculty Showcase. It was in the main ballroom of the Student Center. My wife can testify to this. There was an attendance of around 1,000 to 1,500 people at every one of those events prior to the football game. And they ranged from a woman playing the flute to a political scientist talking about the state of Sino-American relations. And people came irrespective of what the topic was. We can't do that at Hughes. Best we can do is a tent out there, which is not conducive to any kind of an academic presentation. So I can argue the case that an on-campus stadium could conceivably, as it did at Tennessee, generate a linkage between athletics and academics. Let me say one other thing. The problem of our discussion tonight is it's not really about the stadium. The discussion is about the character of big-time athletics and CSU playing at the highest level but not competing well. And so as a faculty member, I detest it that athletics gets 5 times as much, at least 5 times as much publicity as the activity of teaching and doing research and outreach. I detest that. The point of it is, that's a fact. It's an absolute fact. It's been a fact since 1900, since the 1890s, when intercollegiate football began. It plagued the Ivy League then. That's why they went small time in 1954. The issue is universities have made a decision to have commercial sports and to charge a lot of money for them and raise a lot of money for them. And the problem we have at universities is to prevent the distortion of the academic mission by big-time athletics. Now, CSU has not allowed that to happen. And under Tony Frank, I don't think it would happen. But it is a danger, and it's the very nature of American higher education that we sponsor big-time commercialized sports with student athletes, only how many, 389?
391.
391, and we don't pay them anything, which is another one of the travesties of big-time athletics. It needs to be fixed. But
Okay,
we're
I
not
have a
getting
friend
to
who
that.
says we should privatize football and big-time athletics on campus. How do you react to that?
Well, that's a discussion Yeah, we're talking about a stadium, but the stadium is a symbol of something much more fundamental in American higher education. Now I rest my case, I'll shut up.
Okay, Carl?
I'm Carl Patton from CSU. I'm not retired. I've been going to games and graduation ceremonies for 40 years. I'm still going. And thank you for letting me ask some questions. You said I had to ask questions, so I'll ask questions.
That's right.
You've made the point that the crucial issue, and I agree, is in terms of football, is the winning team. I'd like you to take you back to the Sonny Lubick era when we had a glorious winning team. And do you agree, those of you that are familiar with it, probably Graham isn't, he may be, do you agree that during that era, with the winning football team, did you say 4th rated in the country? I forget what you said.
14 was as high as they got.
There was tremendous energy of all of the kinds that you are touting for an on-campus stadium. So the question is, maybe your aim should be a winning team to reap these benefits and put the money on the table with a winning team and then talk about a possible stadium. That's my first question. Have you considered that, Jack?
I think that transforming CSU athletics, football, basketball, all of the athletic programs, into perennially successful winning teams is the priority. Not the priority, it's one of my top priorities. And it's my job as the athletic director to do everything I possibly can to put resources into the hands of our coaches and our student athletes to enable them to succeed. And there's many forms of resources to enable them to succeed. I can tell you one of the top resources that delivers great success amongst athletic programs is great athletes, recruiting great athletes. And so when you send a coach into the marketplace to recruit high school students to come to Colorado State or any other university, giving that coach the best possible story and the best resources to recruit that athlete is a primary objective. And an on-campus stadium is one piece to that puzzle. It's a very significant piece to that puzzle. It's not the only one, but it is a significant piece to that puzzle.
That piece was not there during the Sonny Lubick era of glory.
I'd like to address that just real quickly. Sonny did have great success over what is in CSU football history a very short period of time. He himself has actually come out and said that he never thought that that was sustainable because, frankly, CSU does not and has not ever particularly supported athletics very well. And the facilities which are a very big deal to athletes that are being recruited are, frankly, outdated.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just have one more question. I have a lot of questions, but this one, I'm raising the question from things you've said. There have been arguments about the funding crisis and out-of-state tuition as making a lot of money for CSU. Do any of you have any evidence that this out-of-state tuition issue will save the day?
Yes.
Any of you?
Yes. Yes, actually, there is some objective financial information that Dr. Frank and his staff have developed, and I'm not sure if it's been published, although I know it's been spoken about publicly, that, you know, in concept, in fact, in 2012-13, during our upcoming fiscal year, our budget will be roughly around $900 million, and the amount of support that we'll get from the state of Colorado will be down to about $88 million. That's down from, in 2009, we received about $135 million from the state of Colorado, part of a budget that was closer to $800 million. So you can see the defunding of higher education in the state of Colorado. If that trend continues and we see that $88 million continue to trend down, if not drop down to zero, given the constitutional conditions that exist in the state of Colorado, that is a risk. I think that's a bit of an extreme risk, but the possibility that we will continue to see some cuts in the budgets as a result of lack of funding from the state of Colorado, I think is very real. And for us to not pay attention to that I think is important. But if you take, and you can look at the data around this, you can do the math around this, if in fact we did lose all $88 million of funding from the state of Colorado, how are we going to replace that? And the fact of the matter is, if you replace that $88 million with 5,000 out-of-state students paying out-of-state tuition, that replaces the $88 million.
I think we got the problem right. We got the solution wrong. Yes, it would be nice to get out-of-state students as a result of athletics, but the surveys that have been done, studies, empirical studies show that just doesn't happen. You get in the top 20, you might get applications from another 2 to 8%. That's what it shows. If they were all qualified and you took them all, you would raise the amount of funds for CSU by a couple $1 million a year. You're going to have a tremendous number. You're going to have something like Kansas State has, which is 40% of their students are out-of-state students.
Well, Carl, how do you explain Baylor going from 15,000 applicants last year to 45,000 this year, and the GPAs and the test scores of the incoming students going up at the same time?
Because Baylor had very few applicants before.
15,000 to fill 3,000 positions
right,
last year.
I understand that their
now
sports
they've got
program,
45,000
their sports program had something to do with that. No question about it. But in the long run, what the study...
No, Carl, you said that it only replaces 2 to 8%, and I just cited a 300% statistic.
You're telling me that they've got more applicants, right? I'm telling you that this is a nationwide study of 63 colleges, and Baylor is the abnormal situation. The normal situation is not 45%.
It's not abnormal.
It is abnormal.
It is not abnormal.
Okay, let's go. There's another question in the back.
Chase, I think you mentioned something about getting hired. Okay, so this question is for the panel and for the audience. Show of hands. When you interviewed for a job, how many interviewers asked you what your football team did in your senior year?
Well, no. Okay, you're right, they don't. But here's the thing. There's always that name recognition component that helps a little bit. So if I go to Vermont right now and apply for a job, nobody's going to have any clue what Colorado State is. No clue. We could be a school of 1,000 students. We could be a school of 25,000 students. We could be a school of 50,000 students. No idea. However, I guarantee you they know something about Boise State. About 10 years ago, nobody had any idea who Boise State was. So it is something to be said about making, if nothing else, an initial connection with an employer because they know at least something about your university. That is important to me.
Mr. Graham, in many ways, you really are the embodiment of the stadium. I mean, you really have pushed the idea. I feel I from a perspective of someone who lives in the community, I feel I really have to ask this question. What was your own personal journey like? I know you're very much a CSU longtime supporter, but having been a relatively recent hire as the AD, can I ask you, I hope you don't think I'm being impertinent, but what was the nature of your discussions about the stadium with Tony Frank when you were hired? And specifically, was it a condition which many of us in the community have in our own ways puzzled about? Was it a condition or in any way a term or discussed in connection with your having been hired as the AD?
Well, my own personal journey is I am a graduate and an alum of CSU in 1975 with a degree in U.S. history. And I went on to I played in the National Football League, tried to play in the National Football League for a couple of years unsuccessfully. And then I went on to have a business career for about 35 years. Through the 35 years that I was in business, I kept thinking about how much I appreciated the experiences that I had at Colorado State, athletic experiences that I had and the opportunities that I was given, as well as the academic experiences that I had. And when I went into the workforce, I felt as if I was extremely well prepared. I could read and I could write and I could think critically, and I was very appreciative of that. And I was never once approached by anyone from Colorado State University for support. And given my profile as a successful business person, my profile as a former CSU athlete, including being drafted into the National Football League, that just struck me as being incredibly odd. And so I reached back out to the university in about 2006 and asked what I could do to help. And so I started to become involved by making financial donations to the university and started to become more interested in why is this? Why is this? Why cannot we do something different with this place? It is such a wonderful community. It is such a wonderful university from an academic perspective, from a research perspective. Why can't we do something more? Why is there no name recognition out there? Why is it when I travel to Florida or I travel to Virginia and I tell people that I went to Colorado State University and they say, oh, you're a buff. You went to Boulder. You know, it's not fun. It is not fun when you take that much pride in your university. And so there was a commitment inside me to see something different. And I was asked to give more money to the university recently to fund the Hall of Fame project that's going to be completed at Moby, the expansion of the concourses, the improvement to the concession stands, the restrooms, et cetera. And I said no. And I'm not someone who says no very often. I like to help. But I said no because I felt that we were playing around the fringes, that we weren't addressing the core issues in CSU athletics. I was very frustrated with the level of mediocrity, if not below mediocrity, that we were displaying and projecting to the public about our university. We are the window through which the rest of the world looks at our university. It's true. It's absolutely true. And it just does not settle well with me that our athletics does not represent this university and its standards of excellence to the level that it should. And so that's what drives me. I wake up in the morning and I see my objective as the athletic director is to win games, to take care of these students academically, their characters, and to win games. That's my objective. My purpose is to serve this place. It's to serve the academics and the research of this university. And I believe at the deepest level that by improving the by improving the athletics and raising our standards to a level of excellence, we will produce the kind of brand recognition and the kind of reputation that this place deserves. So that's what motivates me, and that's what causes me to get up. That's why I took this job.
Okay.
Barb, can we get on to the land grant mission by
Yes,
any chance? I think
yes.
that's a pretty important issue for
One more
CSU.
question, and then we'll get on.
Well, I think this is related to the land grant mission question. My name is Chester McCrory. I was a student here in the 1960s. As I look now as a community member in retirement, I can't help but note that the public announced salary of Dr. Frank, responsible for a huge university, the Pueblo campus as well, and a whole ancillary range of things out to county extension agents in every county, that his publicly announced salary is about $392,000. We have a new football coach who gets more than 3 times that amount, $1.3 million plus unnamed incentives. A recent study that
What about your question?
Well, the question is this. A recent study showed that at major universities, in a 10-year period, staff salaries had increased about 27%, faculty about 37%, football coaches 600%. Something's out of kilter.
I don't know what there is to say about that. That wasn't a question.
Well,
That was
I will take that on because, you know, when you think about Peyton Manning is going to make $93 million over the next 5 years playing for the Denver Broncos. The amount of money our actors and actresses are paid, it's out of whack. I mean, I don't dispute your statement in any way, shape, or form. You have to challenge in many respects the economic models that exist in our society and our culture. I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm somewhat aligned with you in that regard. But I will also tell you that there is a business model out there for our athletic department whereby if we make appropriate investments in our athletic department and we are able to achieve the kind of athletic success that I am determined that we're going to succeed, we can move away from an athletic department that receives support and sponsorship from our university to one where we completely wean ourselves from that support and we put ourselves in a position where we can actually be giving back. And so if you're actually capable of delivering that and you've got a head football coach that can deliver those kinds of results that will support that kind of a business model, you have to take it under consideration. That's my view.
Okay, let's talk about the academic mission or the mission of a land-grant university. Maybe, Lauren, you could tell us what you think the mission is, and then we can discuss that and how recruiting fits into that.
That's a big order.
I know.
Land grants were born in the middle of the Civil War. When Abraham Lincoln signed the first Land Grant Act, it was updated in 1890 and again in the early part of the 20th century. Land grants have a fundamental mission for democracy in this country. Jim Henson's first volume on the history of CSU called it Democracy's College in the Centennial State. That's what we are. We're democracy's college. In what sense? Our mission, and it puts it rather brutally in the Morrill Act, is to educate the sons and daughters of the working class. We're not Boulder, and that's a good thing. Boulder is what it is. It's an elite university serving 40% undergraduates from non-Colorado. Boulder it's sometimes called the flagship. Not for Colorado residents it isn't. This institution is the flagship. More Colorado residents come here by far than go to Boulder. So the mission is to educate the sons and daughters of the working class at a reasonable cost that anybody can afford. The problem Jack is talking about, and that Tony Frank talks about so eloquently, is that we're pricing people out of CSU. We are limiting the option of students coming to Colorado State University. They can go to Front Range at half the tuition. But Front Range is a good place, but it's not Colorado State. So athletics play a role in this beyond a doubt, and they have for many, many, many decades. But our fundamental mission is to create thoughtful citizens who will sustain the democracy. We cannot allow in any state commercial athletics to dilute the mission of the land-grant universities. Tennessee is a land grant. It is also the flagship of the state of Tennessee. And it has a fundamental mission to serve the people. And that's what I would say. And when I was chancellor at Tennessee, I was bound and determined that athletics would not distort that fundamental land-grant mission.
Okay.
Now,
Well,
and we did.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. One of my questions is, if we emphasize recruitment of out-of-state students, what does that do to the children of the people who live here?
I don't think it does anything necessarily.
Okay.
And let me make another side comment. When I was provost here, and long before that, one of the main goals we had under Al Yates, under Phil Austin, under every president I served under, was to get more non-resident students, because we made about 125% off them. I mean, it was a crude financial calculation. I was responsible at Alternative Times for undergraduate recruiting and graduate recruiting. And I dreaded Tuesday mornings when we had the president's staff meeting, because always I had to report where we were on non-resident recruiting. We can well afford, I think, to add non-resident students here if we can recruit them. And that's Jack's point, I think. It's also Tony's point. Now, I think it is also pretty darn difficult to achieve. And you'd have to do it over a period of years in order to increase at the rate that we need to increase to replace lost state funding. But I think it's possible.
What's the right balance of in-state, out-state, according to a land-grant mission? Lauren, what would you say, percentage-wise?
I'm a little
50-50
chary of,
or-
no. I think what we have to maintain is our record of admitting all worthy in-state students. And there has to be room for all worthy in-state students here. And that should not be harmed by adding more non-residents, because they will have to meet the same admission standards. And the university, under Tony Frank, but I think always has taken this position, you admit the able students from Colorado to Colorado State. I don't think there is a magic percentage. I'll bet, Jack, though, that if we could get to 32%, we would be in good shape. We're not there right now.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, though, Carl. I worry about it, frankly, because I lived in Boulder for 15 years. I have an appreciation for what the culture is in Boulder, with a split that really is roughly 50-50 between in-state and out-of-state. And it really does compromise, in my view, the quality of the culture on that campus. And it's not the kind of culture that I want to see us have on our campus. And so I think that the concept of moderation and nothing in excess is really important here, and that we need to balance this economic business model and plan against the need for us to preserve the culture of our university.
Okay.
Keep in mind that the state of Colorado limited the number of freshmen, out-of-state freshmen at Boulder. It's not a 50-50 mix anymore, Jack. They can't have more than 40% non-residents in the freshman class.
Okay, Karen?
Thank you. As a student of agriculture at CSU, issue is really important to me, especially since there's only 1/3 of an acre left of agricultural land on the college. I think that we talked a lot about branding earlier, especially Mr. Graham, you mentioned that a lot. I want to emphasize that we already have a brand at this university. We're the Green University. So for us to try to rebrand then as a football institution seems ridiculous to me, and might even have a detrimental effect that we don't even realize. The students of Colorado State currently pay $252 a year, I believe, in athletic fees.
That's for the rec center. A couple hundred for athletic fees, I think. Yeah.
It's 210. 204, I think is the number.
Okay, excuse me, thank you.
Everybody pays it, though.
Yeah, but even so, for us to be paying that much, we're talking about affordability as an institution, and that's just another fee that students are faced with, and they don't have a choice whether to pay that. Right now, the budget for the athletic department, I believe, is $26 million. I read that statistic that said that today. I'm sorry if that's wrong, but and then I read another statistic that said $15 million of which comes from the Colorado State General Fund, which is student fees and taxes and such. So right now I don't see it as a sustainable institution. Maybe if we had a winning team, many changes in place, that could happen. It could give back to the university, but right now the athletic department is being sustained by the students. And when we're talking about whether it's something the students want, whether it's something they can afford, and whether that's in line with our mission as a land-grant university, I think that's a huge question that needs to be answered.
Well,
Chase?
just to try and go ahead, Chase.
I wanted to talk about the fee process here because we keep hearing a lot about this student fee thing, and we're talking about it as sort of this top-down imposed thing that students have to pay, and that's actually not what student fees are. Student fees are proposed. Our student fee process is a model across the country, okay? Student fees are proposed exclusively by students. They're vetted by the Student Fee Review Board, which is 13 individual students, no staff, no faculty members. They get a vote on that fee. They can vote yes or no. There's no restrictions to it. Then it gets kicked over again to our Student Body Senate, which is comprised entirely of elected students, and then it gets kicked up to the Board of Governors, okay? So student fees are not a top-down imposed thing. And when we talk about them, it's important to understand that you do have a say on your student fees. In fact, every student on campus does. We spend the beginning of the year looking for students to serve on these boards. So student fees are a student-driven process, a student-initiated process, and a student-vetted process. And that's fundamentally important in saying, when we're talking about paying $200 a semester. The other part of this, and I'll make it really quick, is there's a lot of fees that students pay that not every student necessarily utilizes. So some students use the rec center, some students go to athletic games, some students use off-campus life, some students use adult learners and veteran services. That's the point of fees, right? It's that we address a wide range of student needs across campus. But again, it's a student-driven process, not an administratively driven process. And that's really important when we're talking about fees.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Chase, how many of those students who are working class maybe don't have the time to go to ASCSU meetings or be engaged in that level really have a say in that process?
Well, the committee is comprised of a number of students who aren't involved in ASCSU. In fact, there's only several members who are ASCSU. There's grad students on there. There's students from a variety of backgrounds. So I think it does represent a pretty good cross-section of the student body.
But in terms of student tuition, you have to take into account what it's going to cost to build the kind of football program they have elsewhere. In the last year's AP Top 25, excluding the 4 super rich schools that are private schools and charge you $40,000, all of those schools have an average tuition higher than CSU's by $2,000. Where did that come from? Why do they need that? They have very expensive football programs that they have to build and that they have to support, and it flows over into the tuition fees as well.
I think that the correlation between tuition at other universities and football is a huge leap, and there's no factual set that you could cite to say that the football program at Ohio State is what's driving their tuition. In fact, the football program at Ohio State contributes back a significant amount of money to the university to enable them to reduce their
I agree. Once you get there,
tuition levels.
once you get there, it's worth having that kind of program financially, but it costs a lot. and
Okay,
takes
well,
a
I
long
have a
time.
question. I would like to know if any of you know, or maybe anyone in the audience knows, How many schools are there where the football team does make money and give money back to the university? Does anyone know that?
It varies from year to year. The number could be 10 in one year. In 2009, it was 25 out of the 119 Division I football bowl subdivision schools. 25 out of 119 made money. Most of them are the big ones, with the stadiums exceeding 100,000 students. And there's a lot of data about this one, although it's murky. If you've ever dealt with athletic departments on a budget basis, as I did, it's pretty hard to know where the money is a lot of the times. But I would tell you this, that the maximum number of schools making money or even breaking even is 25 out of 119. I'll tell you all this, if Tennessee continues on its losing ways in football, with now attendance sinking under 90,000 for average football games, instead of 104,000, they're in trouble, because so much is dependent upon not just tuition, not just ticket revenue, but the premiums that you pay to get a privileged seat in the Neyland Stadium. So most places don't make money.
Okay.
The schools in the lower divisions, now the five big conferences, you'll have some premier schools making money all the time, Ohio State, Michigan, and so on. Then you have my institution, Minnesota, which is a top 20. In Shanghai Jiao Tong's rating of international universities is a top 20. Well, when was the last time Minnesota went to the Rose Bowl? It's when I was an undergraduate there, which is in, truly, the dark ages. So they don't make money. And even with the new stadium, they don't make money.
Okay.
How does it promote the mission of the land-grant school that CSU is to take what's very little land remaining on the central campus, it's really precious at this point, take it away from the future academic buildings and research facilities that could be built there, and take a big piece of that and turn it into a stadium on campus?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I just want to respond to the transparency of the financials of our athletic department, Lauren. Our financials are completely transparent, and anyone can track every single dollar, every single penny of where we spend that money. And I commit to you that anytime you want to look at our financials, they're publicly available, and we are audited regularly. So I will commit to you around that transparency. The design of the stadium itself and its ability to integrate not just a football stadium, but other multi-use possibilities as well, is absolutely on the table. Lacrosse, rugby, soccer, so athletically lots and lots of possibilities, as well as the possibility to integrate other capabilities into the building, such as an alumni welcome center, such as meeting rooms, faculty offices, et cetera. All of those things are on the table. There's an expectation that this building is not going to be used 6 times a year, but rather that it can be used multiple times a year.
Okay. My question wasn't what this facility is going to look like, but you're taking land, and there isn't a lot of raw land left at CSU. It's either got something on it or it just isn't there. Taking that away from future academic buildings, research facilities, and land grant mission purposes, taking it away and putting it into a stadium site. How does that serve the mission of CSU?
Well, again, I think that through the feasibility work that's taking place right now, that's the kind of question that's being asked and will be answered. And I would say that I think that at the heart of this project, in consideration of the construction of an on-campus stadium, is complete service to the land grant mission. And so if this isn't compliant with and consistent with our mission as a land grant university, it shouldn't go forward.
We have one final question that I would like to ask the panel. For your final comments, tell us what alternatives are there to reach the goals of excellent academics, high student and alumni involvement, out-of-state recruitment, and enhanced reputation outside of an on-campus stadium. What other possibilities would achieve the same goal?
I don't think there's one answer to that. Let me give you the example of Kansas State, where I was offered a job in 1991, and the president told me that he had in place, and he just retired this year, 4 things. And Tony Frank knows these 4 things. First of all, he wanted to be competitive in what was then, I think, the Big 8 or the Big 12 or the Southwest Conference, whatever it was then. And if he couldn't be competitive at that high level, he wanted to get out of that conference. Secondly, he wanted his graduating students to compete at the very highest level, where Harvard was, for prestigious postgraduate fellowships, such as the Trumans, the Rhodes, the Fulbrights. Third, he wanted his marching band to be the best in the country. And fourth,
You got that one.
Fourth, he wanted his debate team to win the national championship. And they did all of those. They did all of those. So I think that is also the mission that Colorado State has, and I would bet you anything that Tony Frank knows that and plans to do it.
Okay, Carl?
All these things you want, you get by a focus on high-level academics and making sure people know about it. And my last comment is, anything new can do, yous can do better.
Okay, Chase?
So I think it's a couple things, and this is a really complex question, but I'll try and make it very quick. One, we have to continue programs like Tony Frank's commitment to Colorado, which ensures that students who make less than $57,000 a year don't pay any tuition fees to come to this school. That's how you help you continue to achieve your mission as a land grant. Two, we have to continue to be an attractive value proposition. That's why I came here. I think it's a good bang for my buck. The second we lose that, we're done. Third, we have to place a premium on academics. We have to retain quality faculty. I think the 3% salary increase across the board this year is a means to accomplish that, especially since we've been on a pay freeze the last 4 years. We have to continue to attract quality students. And finally, and I'll close on this, I'm a fundamental supporter of this stadium for a lot of reasons, but more than anything else, I care about the process. So regardless of the outcome that we get to ultimately, the process being transparent, open, and done in the right way is more important to me than any outcome we ultimately achieve. So,
Karen?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to answer that question. I believe that a really good way we can achieve all of these things that we're trying to get to is to use the existing facility we have and turn it into a multi-use stadium that Jack Graham was proposing, and it sounds wonderful. What if we created better picnic areas there for better tailgating? What if we built bike path infrastructure to connect with the cycling culture in Fort Collins? What if we had a family center to draw a more family-friendly experience like the Ram Town that the previous athletic director did? I think that was a great idea. And we could really emphasize Hughes as a part of our culture and a part of our campus, maybe even put student housing there, connected to the trails that are there under the A and the outdoor areas and paths that really could make that a powerful game day experience that we're looking for. Really integrate that into the culture of our campus rather than completely abandoning it, which would not be in line with our mission as a land grant or a green university whatsoever. I think we can achieve all these things without having to spend all of the resources and the money and the time and the effort to build a new stadium, but it would be more economical and more powerful statement to just use what we have and use it in a very good and way that's significant to the culture of our city and our community and our campus here.
Okay, Eric?
I think that, as everyone else has said, there's just an awful lot of things that you have to work on all at once. I don't view it as alternatives. I view it as you work on everything that you can. You do private fundraising, you do advertising, you hire the best faculty and staff you can, you bring in the best students you can, you make partnerships with business. But you do all those things. You don't do those things in a vacuum. You don't say, we're going to do this instead. You say, let's do everything we can to make it all work.
Okay, Jack?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's been a lively conversation, and I hope everybody has benefited from it. I do think that the process that we're employing to investigate this question is a good one, and I want this process to be completed successfully and for us to get to the end of it and make a well-informed and quality decision for our university for the long run. And in the event we come down to the conclusion that we should not, in fact, pursue the construction of an on-campus stadium, then I think we're going to have to re-engage a lot of very bright, talented people to figure out whether or not there's an alternative to the financial model and concepts that have been put forward associated with the construction of an on-campus stadium.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our studio and viewing audiences. Now.